Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you and welcome to Threshold of Hope, where we take a look at the writings of the church. Before we get to that, I want to mention that today is the feast of St. Martin of Tours. He was a Roman, born in 316, just 3 years after Christianity was legalized by Constantine. And his father was a soldier, he became a soldier, but then as an adult became a Christian. And one of the famous scenes, usually this is the way you see him portrayed, is that he's taking his military cloak, cutting it in half, giving half to a naked beggar, and keeping the other half for himself. But from there, that began a process of becoming a hermit and a monk, and then he was elected to be a bishop, the bishop of the city of Tours. And as I mentioned in my homily this morning, it's important to see he goes from the beginning of Christian peace with the Roman government to the beginning of the end of the Roman government. In 375, the Visigoths had attacked the Roman Empire and killed the emperor and wiped out a Roman army. They conquered then Greece, what's now or used to be Yugoslavia, Croatia, and all that area. They called it Illyria. And then finally, just 13 years after St. Martin died, they sacked Rome for the first time, but not the last. And so he's somebody who saw that the transition away from the corrupt Roman culture towards Christ was able to give him a perspective for what is important and lasting. And he's one of the great saints. Also, he is, as I mentioned, he was a soldier. It's very important for us to remember the soldiers today on Veterans Day. This is the day we recall all those who fought in the various wars that protect our freedom. And we want to honor them, hence they're wearing a poppy, which is from the end of World War I, which ended on this date. And at 11 o'clock in the 11th month, the 11th day. They hoped it would be the war to end all wars. It was not. It was not. As we've seen, greater secularization of governments and removing of governments and the population from their Christian roots has only led to more and more violence and war. You've probably heard religion is the biggest cause of war. It's not true. Absolutely untrue. The last 100 years has seen 305 million people killed, either in war or executed by their own governments. Secular governments, rarely, not so much the religious. Those are the 305 million from secular governments, compared to 2.5 million who died in 2,000 years of Christianity for religious wars. So, you know, this is something that we have to be thankful, but also with a patron like St. Martin, patron of cavalry and other soldiers, to be reminded that we need Christ very much in our lives and to see in him a source of peace, not secular government. All right, we are going through Fides et Ratio. You can get a paperback copy of it from EWTN's religious catalog by going to their website, which is EWTNRC.com, RC of course for religious catalog, or you can call them 1-800-854-6316. Or if you prefer, you can download a free electronic copy of Fides et Ratio by going to our website, EWTN.com, our main website. Go to where it says Libraries, go to Document Library, and then type in Fides et Ratio, and you can download it into your computer and print it out or read it from the computer. And of course, we'd love to have you involved and participating in our program. You can do like all these nice people, big group from Atlanta and folks scattered from different parts of the country as well. Or you can send us a question by writing to threshold@EWTN.com. Or you can call during the live broadcast, which is on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the phone number in North America is 1-800-221-9460. Or you can go to, if you're outside North America, country code is 1. You know why it's 1? Americans invented the telephone, so we're first. So it's 1-205-271-2980. All right, we're on paragraph 98. We've been talking about how, again, that connection between philosophy and theology is important. He says that that also applies to moral theology, where you study what's right and wrong. Philosophy needs to be recovered to the point where the understanding of faith, so philosophy, using reason and logic, helps you to understand your faith and its connection to your moral life. You don't have any of that isolated. It's a sign that a person is not mentally healthy if all of their life is put into little compartments. I have my religion over here, but I don't let that interfere in my business. I don't let that interfere in my politics. I don't let that interfere in the way I act morally. My sexual life is over here. All of these things are little compartments. And I like to remind people, ships also have compartments. The time when they shut all the compartments is when the ship is sinking. Closing off the compartments from one another is not a sign of good health for ships or your mentality. Keeping everything integrated is key. That's key. So that's what we have here. And we want to see faith linked to moral life because we have a lot of issues in the modern world to deal with. There are challenges to our morality in social life. Today, something that never would have occurred 100 years ago, 50 years ago, is what is marriage? It's always assumed to be between a man and a woman. But now those questions are being raised socially. Is it okay when you're, if I'm afraid of too much pain in the dying process, is it okay for me to go ahead and take my own life so I don't feel the pain? That wasn't a question so much before. And to make it legal, and that's the other thing, for the state to make it legal so doctors can do that. Abortion, it happened in the past, but not so commonly. And out of wedlock childhood, and accepting out of wedlock childhood, having children out of wedlock. It happened before, but it was 3 or 4% 100 years ago. Today it's 43% of all children. And in the African American community, 73%, Hispanic is 27%. So this is, these are new social issues and that are related to poverty and everything else. Economic questions. Now we have all these multinational corporations. And when one government raises the taxes, they just move away. So they don't have to pay taxes where it's high. And there are moral issues related to that. Also political issues. Matter of fact, sometimes people say, this party is so close to the big business. I assure you, both parties are totally together with big business, just different big businesses. The bankers that support the Democrats are different than the bankers that support the Republicans, but they're both supported by big bankers and other big industries, and each party does what they can for their friends in big business. The morality of this for both parties and for the middle class. The issue of how, it's been going on. People complained under the Republican administration, but under Mr. Obama's administration, the top 2% have their income increased by 35%, while the middle class goes down. This is something that it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat. Happens under both. And I don't think either one wants that to happen, but these are moral questions that apply to politics and economics. We have to deal with scientific issues. The state of California, which is already hugely in debt, voted to have billions of dollars for research into stem cells of unborn children whom they had to kill to get the stem cells. And they made fun of the church. They tried to bring up the Galileo affair. See, the church is trying to stop science. No, it's not. It's trying to stop murder. And as it turns out, of course, the stem cells of embryos is too unformed, too plastic to be able to use for medicinal purposes. So it didn't even work. Whereas adult stem cells, where you don't have to kill the adult can give his or her permission. These are some of the moral questions. And to say, well, science should be able to do whatever it wants. No, it shouldn't. That's what Dr. Mengele said at Auschwitz when he was experimenting on the Jews. He said, well, I'm just being a scientist. No, you're not. And you have to respect moral values when you do science. It's not just, and that has to be considered. And that what we see is that the ethical conscience of a lot of people in our society is very much skewed. We have a disorientation. Why? As we'll see here, because too many people seek whatever they feel like instead of taking a look at what does it mean to be good and what does it mean to be bad, and how do I form my conscience so that I seek what is good and avoid what is bad. But if you don't seek the good, but seek yourself in self-expression, it's like an artist who seeks to express himself or herself and ends up coming up with something ugly, but it's authentic. This is how I feel. Good, keep it to yourself. Don't put it in my museums. It's ugly. Pope St. John Paul mentions his encyclical Veritatis Splendor, which means the splendor of truth, which is what we are going to be covering next. And he noted there in paragraph 32 of that encyclical, once the idea of a universal truth about the good, knowable by human reason, is lost, inevitably the notion of conscience also changes. See, this is what he means, that if you think nobody knows what the good is, if that's your stance, then you say, well, whatever you feel like, whatever you feel is good, because we don't know that there is good. That's what the change in conscience is. If you don't think you can know what's good, your conscience changes. In that kind of state, conscience is no longer considered in its primordial reality as an act of a person's intelligence. That's why people, I hear this most especially on CNN, where they will say, well, how do you feel about that? When asking about a moral question, those are your feelings. No, they're not. They're not my feelings. My feelings might be frustration that you think that these are my feelings. My anger that I think you're stupid for not thinking that. But those are my feelings. But my thoughts that come from my mind are what's in my conscience. Such as, I shouldn't call you stupid, because Mom said not to. And that the function of the conscience is to apply the universal knowledge of the good in a specific situation, and thus to express a judgment about the right conduct to be chosen here and now. So once you get an idea of the good, then you can take that and apply it to concrete situations. For instance, being able to cure certain nervous system disorders is a good. Because, and what makes it a good? That the nervous system should function according to the way it was made to function, which is to send electric charges through the nerves to the various organs to respond as they're supposed to respond and accomplish what your mind tells them to do. That's what the nervous system is supposed to do. So you can cure that, that's a good thing. But then I also must keep other goods in mind, such as the dignity of human individuals, so that I cannot kill somebody to accomplish the other good. That's because it is a greater good to protect human dignity, because humans have immortal souls. And that's a bigger good than fixing the nervous system. That's why I can't use embryonic stem cells. I'm killing an individual. He goes on in Veritatis Splendor 32. Instead, there is a tendency today, to grant to the individual conscience the prerogative of independently determining the criteria of good and evil. So each person says, this is what my good is. If I feel like having a child, because, and I've heard teenage girls say this, I want to have a baby because I want someone to love me. No, that's why you get a dog. You have a baby so you love the baby, not so the baby loves you. A dog will love you more. The dogs don't go through adolescent rebellion. A baby is there for you to love. And so that's, again, where the person thinks independently, they determine the criteria, good and evil, for me. What's in it for me? And then they act accordingly. And they bring a child into the world outside of wedlock because, and again, sometimes very intentionally, to have someone who loves them. Now, they're dealing with a lack of love. That's for sure. But you don't have a baby to give you what your own parents didn't give you. You have a baby so you can give that baby what your parents didn't give you. That's the difference. And such an outlook, a self-centered outlook, is quite congenial to an individualist ethic, where you base your morality on what you do as an individual, wherein each individual is faced with his own truth, different from the truth of others. Well, this is what you expect in our culture, because you see, as we've said many, many times, that they are relativists. They can't say who's going to do what. And remember, this is always going to be the issue with relativism. If I have my truth and I act on my personal truth and you act on your personal truth, then we have no truth in between us upon which we can base a discussion or argument. and I don't mean a yelling, screaming argument. Yelling, screaming arguments, like you see on talk shows, on television, are about people who don't know what they're talking about, and only raising their voice tries to win the argument. But that gets at the point of relativism, because relativists don't share truth between themselves and other people. And therefore, without an argument based on objective truth, the only way to resolve issues with a relativist is that might makes right. I don't base my arguments in the law courts on the Constitution or other legal issues. I base it on whether I can do an end run on your issue and get what I want. I can use power to win and you lose. And that is the mentality of the relativist. They don't start off that way, but they inevitably move towards might makes right. And this is something, pay close attention. If you ever get a chance, take a look at Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals. And he gives 10 rules of why you should use as your ethic that the ends justifies the means. So if I think that what I'm doing is good, I can do anything to get it. He teaches that to people who do Saul Alinsky organizing. Read that and then pay attention to the way some of the politicians act. This is permeating our political discourse. And because there is no objective truth for them. The Constitution's not objective. The Declaration's not objective. What I want is what I want. And anything I can do to get it is acceptable. Read Rules for Radicals, and you'll see it laid out, plain as can be. Now, Pope John Paul went on, throughout Veritatis Splendor, he underscored clearly the fundamental role of truth in the moral world. And when you're dealing, and he says, we won't go into too much, but as a little clue, how do you find out what is good and true? You take a look at the purpose for the things around you. So for instance, the good of the stomach is to digest food that is going to help the body get the minerals and vitamins, roughage, and all the things that the body needs to maintain itself. Then that's good food. If, though, on the other hand, I eat only for the taste, and my taste, I don't care what anybody says, my taste buds say that soda pop and potato chips are good, so that's all I'm going to eat. Does that do what is good for the stomach? No. Matter of fact, for any of you teenage girls out there thinking about drinking a lot of pop, soda pop ages your skin not unlike the way cigarettes do. If that's any motive. Well, I want to look 21. Yeah, wait till you get 21. You want to look 16. So that's what we mean by the truth of the good. That what is something oriented towards. And when it comes to human beings are oriented towards knowing God and choosing Him. That's why we have intellect and free will. We're to know God and because we have that soul that's eternal, the good for humanity is to know God and choose to love Him for all eternity. Not passing feelings, but a decision and a knowledge. In the case of the more pressing ethical problems, Truth demands of moral theology a careful inquiry rooted unambiguously in the Word of God. So we use Scripture to guide our search for what God has revealed about what's good. Thou shalt not commit murder. That's good. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Or watch movies like 50 Shades of Grey that are promoting adultery. You don't do that. And you don't, disrespect and dishonor your parents. And you don't bear false witness. These are starts. But then we have to apply these goods to all the different experiences of life. And God, usually, God willing, we develop habits of thinking towards the good and avoiding the bad. We try to get those habits so it becomes second nature. But we do have to think about it carefully and then develop the habits that are good. Moral theology has a mission. And to fulfill it, moral theology must turn to philosophical ethics because we do need to think through the moral issues. When the church makes various decisions publicly about some of the moral issues like abortion and such, they haven't just said, the Pope feels kind of infallible today. He's got to say something. No, he's got a whole slew of scientists and theologians consulting together and thinking through the ramifications. They don't just say, I feel infallible, and make a musical out of it. Instead of I feel pretty, I feel infallible. No. This is something, they think it through. And they use scientists' insights. They seek them out. They have meetings with them in bioethics and the other areas of science. This is one of the keys. And you look to the truth of what is good. That's the goal. You don't go what I feel like as a subject, my subjective, personal feelings, nor do I go to what became very popular in the 1800s, which is called utilitarianism. What does that mean? It means that you do what is useful. Then you have to ask the question, useful for what? It has to be useful for a good. Well, it's good, useful for the common good, the good of the most. What do you mean by the good? See, that's why utilitarianism is too weak a philosophy. You still have to assume what is good. And good philosophy makes the good explicit, not assumes. Such an ethics implies and presupposes an understanding, a philosophy of the way human beings are, what he calls philosophical anthropology. What does it mean to be human? In analyzing that, as well as a metaphysics of what is good. Where does the good come from? How does that relate to God, who is good and the source of all good? So you get this organic vision of seeing what does it mean to be human, what is the good, and you link this necessarily to Christian holiness, because that's the goal, to be with God, to be holy, as God is holy, which is the principle at the beginning of more reflections in Leviticus chapter 19. And you want to practice the human virtues of justice and temperance, and the supernatural virtues like faith, hope, and love. And moral theology will then tackle the various problems with its own competence, such as dealing with the question of international peace and interior peace. You want to deal with social justice to help those who are marginalized in societies, to deal with the nature of the family, the defense of life from conception to a natural death, and to deal with the natural environment so that we don't say, I just want all this stuff in the environment for me. I don't care about the next generation. No, there's an ethical concern for the beauty of the environment, for its own integrity, and its sustainability into the future. That is the appropriate and effective way to think through moral theology issues, using philosophy and human reason and faith together. All right, we're going to take a break, come back in just a couple minutes, and get your phone calls as well as the questions from our studio audience and emails. So please stay with us. Well, first of all, we want to thank all these folks who have come here to our studio. It's wonderful to have you. And we'd like to invite you to come and join us. If you get a chance to make a pilgrimage down here, please contact our pilgrimage department. Their phone number is 205-271-2966. Or you can go to the website, EWTN.com. They will give you schedules of when the programs are going to have guests, times of masses, tours of the studios, directions up to Hansville. I hope all of you get a chance to go up there and pray with the sisters, and places you can stay nearby, and some nice places. Some of you are staying over with sister servants. They have a really nice retreat house, and they put up a number of our groups. Beautiful chapel and all that, and good restaurants. Now, the Atlanta folks, fine, but some of you Yankees coming up here want to make sure that you get some of those fried green tomatoes that we're so famous for down here. And our other religiously themed restaurants, like Hamburger Heaven and Golden Rule Barbecue, very religious. All right, so do come and join us. All right, we're going to start off with a studio question. Let's start off with this gentleman here. Sir, where are you from?
Chicago, North Side.
All right, yeah, that's part of Chicago I'm from.
Thank you, Father. I was wondering, Chicago has become more and more hostile towards the Catholic Church in the last 10 years. Things happen now that you never would have dreamed 10, 20
right?
years ago.
Such as?
If you're pro-life, even if you say you're Catholic, there's a lot of hostility that you never would have dreamed.
Yeah, okay.
Is it going to get worse, or how do you see?
You know, this is one of the very important questions, because, you know, where you as a Chicagoan would notice it more is that in the past, you know, half of the city is Catholic. And there was no hostility. I mean, there was a great working relationship, you know, with the church. The church tried to help, you know, build up good citizens. And the city was, you know, favorable to all the churches, but Catholics were the biggest, so it was very noticeable. But now it's become you're right, it has become hostile. I've heard that increasingly. It's been going on since the 70s, after the first Mayor Daley died. And, you know, this is something that is going on in a number of areas in the country, because some politicians see the church's moral position as the stumbling block to what they want to accomplish on a variety of levels. And they see us through the lens of being a political force that is a hindrance to them. And that's all that we are to them, is a political hindrance. And the more we speak up, the more they see us as a power broker and not as a church. And that they want to go out, again, I mentioned Alinsky. I used to be an Alinsky-style community organizer on the near west side of Chicago, down at Racine and Taylor in the Holy Family Parish. Rough neighborhood. And, one of the things that Alinsky also teaches is that you have to go after your enemies. If people are against you, they are your enemies. And that's why the means, the ends justifies the means. Anything you can do to take the enemy down, you get them. That was very much, as a matter of fact, that is why Saul Alinsky dedicated his book to Satan. I don't even think he believed in Satan. He may have. But he just saw Satan was the first rebel against the establishment. The establishment is bad, we're good. But now that people of his mindset have gotten into positions of political power, they haven't stopped thinking of their enemies lists. They still do. And they just see that the church is the establishment that is trying to stop me, instead of seeing themselves as the establishment. And especially when we point out that they are messing up, that they are incompetent at what they do. So it's not just that we disagree with them, so you're also incompetent. Then they really get mad. And so we may have to deal with that. But one of the things is to see this through that lens of Alinsky approach that they are taking, and to be able to speak back to them more cleverly than they try to undo us. Remember our Lord's teaching, be as gentle as doves, but as cunning as serpents. I'm for that. I'm for that. And from the way I've seen a lot of the politicians, I don't know Chicago's politics anymore, but from what I see in other places, it's not too hard to be more cunning than they are. I don't know if you heard that one of the guys who designed the health care bill was videotaped, and now it's on the internet, where he's at a meeting with college people. And he's saying, yes, we had to lie to the people. Now you can say it's because of the stupidity of the voters. He says that word, because of the stupidity of the voters. But we had to hide, because if we told them what was in it, they never would have voted for it. You're right. And so we can be more cunning than people like that who videotape themselves telling us that they're lying. And then we respond more cleverly than they do. All right, we have an email here. Hello, Father Mitch. You recently cited Fides at Ratio number 95, saying correctly that God's truth is unchanging. But the translation of his truth has changed. St. Jerome's Vulgate became the official Bible in the Western Church and was used for all doctrinal discussions. Yet his translations were not as accurate in reflecting the original languages as they could have been. For example, in Luke 1:28, Hail Mary, full of grace, would be accurately expressed as favored one, hail, favored one. And just as you illustrated happening with the mid-synod report, misinterpretation results in misunderstanding. When they did that report at the synod, one of the things that somebody translated an Italian verb as we need to value the gifts of homosexuals, where it said in Italian, we need to evaluate. There's a different nuance. Press like the first one. So the Council of Trent reaffirmed the authenticity of the Vulgate and forbade anyone from interpreting the Holy Scriptures differently. Yet even today, Even Roman Catholic hermeneutics recognize the Vulgate's errors. Is it not just as possible to preserve error as it is truth? Howard in Belcamp, Maryland. Well, first of all, Howard, you give one example of translating the Greek word kecharitomeni in Luke 1:28 as the one who has been favored. That's what that would be a literal English interpretation of it. However, that doesn't mean that St. Jerome mistranslated or falsely translated it. One of the ways in which you can see that is when you also read the Syriac translation, it also says, Hail Mary, full of grace. And so does a later medieval Hebrew translation. Why did they do that? Because they were following St. Jerome? No. It's because they were dealing with an idiom. The Greek language at the time of St. Jerome and of the translation of the Syriac was the common language of the empire in the East. He spoke it. He learned it as a second language, but and then he also learned Hebrew as a third language and Aramaic as a fourth. And, so he learned Greek from people whose first language was Greek. And they helped him understand kecharitomeni in this idiomatic way. They used an idiom, which is the same idiom that the Syriac translators did, because they also understood that the Greeks did it. Now, that doesn't mean there's error. And when you look at the Marian doctrines, they don't use that idiomatic as the sole basis for any doctrine. And so, and the church, as a matter of fact, after Trent, there was already before Trent it was going on, making sure that we had the best quality of the Vulgate possible. And furthermore, that scholars still today use the Vulgate to see what did we have in the 4th century manuscript of the Greek text that St. Jerome was using. So it's still consulted quite scholarly. So I wouldn't say that the Vulgate's errors, I wouldn't call that an error. It's an idiomatic translation, but not a wrong one. Now, we might translate it in a more literal way into English rather than idiomatic way. But believe me, when you go through translations today, we also use idiomatic because the literal one is often too odd sounding. So you always are using idioms. But it is important to also go back to the Greek, and in fact, that was also going on in the 16th century as more Greek manuscripts became available. And it's not that the church rejected the Greek manuscripts, but they would use that as part of the discussion, but the official formula in the doctrines would always come from the Vulgate. And I say it's too much to say that it's an error, but it'd be problematic. But that'd be a good discussion in a translation class, and I'd be happy to engage that. We had another question. Ma'am, where are you from?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Good, you're part of this big group here.
St. Monica Church.
Great. Which church?
St. Monica.
St. Monica. Great to have you. And your question?
And I think it's important for us to try to find ways in order that we can protect our Christian values.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that families and parents start with children that teach them the right values, love, and show that in the way they live and practices. And I think it is very difficult because we see so much on television for us to realize, how important it is to us to live our life that way. Like you said, faith is number one, love and family values. And it's important for us because it's so, everybody's against it and you hear so many negative things about it. Sure. But it's, when you see people that go to church, they're so happy and loving, and I think that's what it's about.
But one of the things that will be important for us today is that we have to help one another think through the values that permeate the culture. The culture gives all these values off. And we just say, oh, well, that's different. I've heard any number of people, oh, that's different. Yes, it's different from what? From what's good? Then reject it. If it's different from what we used to do, well, still, is it true or false? Being different is not a very meaningful statement. It has to, what we want to know is it true and good? Or is it false and evil? Now, you say that in the modern world, oh, you're so judgmental. Well, yes, because I don't want to be a thorough idiot. You know, I'm idiotic enough. I just want to be thorough at it, and I try to think through some of the things that are good, some that are bad. And this is where we have to work with our young people, knowing what they're listening to and watching, and then engaging them in a discussion so they don't just go, oh, Mom, you know, but really they say, well, tell me about it. What's going on? You tell me. Explain it, Lucy. Tell me what's going on here. And that would be a good thing. But yeah, we have to really, we can't, in the past, when I was a kid growing up, there were eyes of moms all over the neighborhood who knew what we were up to and called, hey, Lorraine, your kid's doing this. And then I was in trouble. You know, you were busted. You were busted. And so today you don't, well, you know, I can't say anything because that's not my kid. My mom gave him plenty of permission to say stuff. All right. I have another email from Ryan in Springfield, Massachusetts. Hello, Father Pacwa. I'm a Baptist who lives in a predominantly Catholic town. I've been to Springfield. Nice town. I have been to both Protestant and Catholic churches and have observed how these churches engage their youth. Many of my friends are Catholic, and they don't seem to have a strong faith, as opposed to many of my Protestant friends who are involved in youth groups and are reading the Bible daily. What is the Catholic Church doing to help engage young people, and what could be done in the Catholic Church to make it more appealing to young people and to help them be excited about their faith? Ryan, great question. And, you know, thank you for your concern for our youth. This is something that is a big issue. One of the problems, Ryan, that goes back to 1968, probably before you were born, it'll be very important that a lot of people that taught Catholic faith to young people came to believe that it didn't matter what they believed, just so long as they were nice to each other. And there was a sort of a blinking, instead of staring down the culture. A lot of Catholic catechists blinked in the face of the Cultural Revolution of the late 60s and into the 70s and 80s. Instead of saying, no, we're going to think through this on the basis of Catholic morality. Again, a lot of folks inside the church were saying, well, that's the institution and the establishment, and we can't go along with that. It's not a matter of just going along with the institution to keep your job. Is it true or not? And instead of helping young people to think through and grapple with those things, we went to other stuff and taught nonsense. When I started teaching in high school, that's sort of the way I was expected to teach, and that's what I started doing. And I could see after one semester, this is absurd. I made a lot of mistakes my first semester, and I completely reoriented my course the second semester, and the other semesters I taught, because I could see this avoidance of teaching the faith and calling people to know Jesus and understand Him and understand the gospel as well as commit yourself to Him. That is dumber than a box of rocks. And so, you know, I totally changed my whole approach after one semester of failing. I regret it took me that long. But this is something that we have to have our own selves clearly committed to calling people to salvation in Jesus Christ. Forgiveness of sins through his saving death and glorious resurrection. The promise of eternal life. So that we're not calling people to be nice folks, but to be saints. And that's one of the things that's missing. And I think that is one of the ways I would urge catechists. Now, what I see is that a number of young folks who have come up through that mess reject it and say, that was dumb. I'm going to come in there. I'm going to teach the faith. And they're on fire. They're on fire, doing great stuff. And, you know, so maybe the problem is the folks over 30. My generation. Sir, where are you from?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Good to have you here.
Parish of St. Monica.
As a matter of fact, you're the gentleman that passed out these poppies.
Yes, sir.
Are you a veteran?
No, sir.
All right. Well, glad that you honor the veterans. God bless you.
Thank you.
And your question?
Father, would you comment on the statement that faith without reason becomes superstition and reason without faith becomes chaos?
Sure. There are plenty of examples of both. That if you, and you sometimes see people inside the church, that they, you know, will say prayers to get stuff without thinking of the ramifications of the rest of their lives. They just say, oh, I got to get a car. You know, like it goes to the point of the silly person who said, oh, Lord, just make it possible. Let me win the lottery so that I'll have all my problems. And month after month, she finally gets mad at the God for doing a novena for 9 months and never won the lottery. And God finally says to her, honey, you got to buy a lottery ticket. You know, being dumb, and by the way, don't buy, I'm not promoting the lottery, I'm against it. It's a waste of money. But apart from that, you know, I don't think that we can live our faith without integrating, and that's where the mind comes in to pull the different parts of our faith life together. That's what we do. And then the same thing, if you don't have faith, okay, look at some of the college campuses. You know, just some of this, they just had one campus. They started jumping on cars and trashing them. And for what? You know, look at what happens. Instead of God, they get high on marijuana. In some of the states, it's legal now, and D.C. And is that making people more sensible? No. That's why we used to call them burnouts. Have another question? Just a minute or so.
A while back, I was having a conversation with a Christian, and in our discussion, I invited him. I said, well, let's think about this. And he says, I don't think, I just believe. Mm-hmm. And in that particular mindset, I think there's a context sometimes within when my children go to school, and from the teachers, sometimes they have this perception that whatever is of faith is not something in any way related to the use of reason, and that science is the sum total of all reason. And so, for example, they'll pit and say they'll have a false dichotomy between the understanding of creation in Scripture versus science, and that there's an either-or dichotomy that we as Catholics do not subscribe to. Can you just articulate how to negotiate those kind of things?
First of all, one of the things, as soon as he said, I just believe, I don't think, that is a thought. He thought about that and came up with that using his mind. Now, we have to then ask, is there nothing more than that? Do you just believe that red lights mean stop? Or do you think about it as it's starting to turn yellow? No, of course you think all day long. But he's afraid of where some theologians have gone and taken away from faith, and so then he's afraid to think too much about his faith. And that's where the church helps us to do just that and call them to that sense. But right now I'm being called to a sense of thinking about the end of the show. May the Lord bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And again, we want to thank you because you bring this and all the other shows to us. So please keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and cable bill, and we'll pay our bills too. Thank you.